these punitive damages are massive, and it's clear that Monsanto, with its history, they've been getting hit pretty hard with these punitive damages. And I know that you've mentioned a lot about how the board that oversees the company, right? They need to feel safe, and they want the investors to feel safe and think that they're not going to be getting hit with these numbers consistently. How are they managing? Because that is $700 million, over $700 million for 7 people. They have other products that are also getting massive punitive damages. How do they have the money for this, first of all? And then second, how are they planning on just continuing to pay? That just seems so unsustainable. Prioritizing profits. Prioritizing
dangerous drug and product cases.
Oh, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Welcome, everyone, to the first ever Christmas episode of Prioritizing Profits. For any listeners that can't see, I am wearing a Christmas hat. Doesn't really fit too well, but
the headphones seem to interfere.
Yeah. In my head, I imagined both of us wearing Christmas hats and it being this whole festive episode. And then minutes before, you made me realize, made things a little bit more realistic, that with the headphones and...
A little complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Well, and then I had these big present bow earrings that I was going to wear. I'm like, wait a minute. I have headphones on. I can't wear earrings. So then I put on a festive Christmas necklace, but it was jangling so much that it was interfering. So we were not. But I'm in bright red.
Well,
it's very Christmassy here and holiday-esque. So that's the best we can do.
Yeah, and when this comes out, Christmas will be over. So we might be a little late. However, for us, it is right before Christmas, the Wednesday before Christmas. So you guys get to celebrate Christmas vibes with us. Another week, another episode. Happy to be back. How we doing? How we feeling? How's this weekend? How you doing?
All good. Weekend was busy with holiday celebrations. We had a party Saturday night, which was really fun. Saw a lot of people, did the little festive dress up and, food, dancing, the whole 9 yards.
You had a party on Saturday. Were you hosting it?
Oh, God, no. We attended a party on Saturday.
See, that's the best way to go about it.
It's the way to go.
You get to go, have fun, and then not have to deal with the aftermath.
Sneak out when it's time to go.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to be up at all hours cleaning up. And
I think that's my favorite part, is being able to sneak out and leave. Because, I think it was last weekend or 2 weekends ago when Christina's office, they had a Christmas office party, and
right.
I hosted it. My first thought was, wow, I'm going to have to stay here and do the entire thing, right, from beginning to end. You're there until the last person leaves. And that's slightly overwhelming.
Wait, was the whole party at your house? I thought just the pregame.
It was just the pregame. But it was long. The party started at 6:30, and originally the plan was 5:30. And then one of the girls was like, oh, no, we need more time, 4:30. Jesus, 2 hours for a pregame? My God.
I wouldn't make it to the actual game if I was pregaming for
that long,
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think and it's work. Come on, you can't be plastered at a work event.
Right. And you were hosting for 2 hours. That's impressive.
Yeah. Anyways, party this weekend.
Yeah, so we had the party on Saturday night, and then we went to Mr. Bing's holiday show on Sunday night, which was really fabulous.
Have you been recently to that?
Well, so during the season, he has them about once a month. Although there wasn't one in November. So the last one was October, then there's the December, and then we'll also be there for the New Year's event.
And they're different themes, right? Each one?
Well, they are different performers. And so this one, it was Carol Bufford she flew in from New York, and she's a actually pretty well-known cabaret singer, and she did this just amazing show. Cabaret. Yeah, and she even made a joke about people, what people think of as cabaret. And so she said it's like vintage pop. So it's kind of like old school cabaret, not, new school cabaret, which often involves stripping. There was no stripping.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily new school cabaret. I don't think there is cabaret. I guess, yeah, kind of. But, you watch episodes of Mad Men, and they're like, oh, let's hit the cabaret with a nice whiskey. And then it's the whole, shebang, shaboom, nudity.
Okay, there was no nudity.
No
No.
nudity. Oh.
But it was a really, really good show. Really amazing. He's bringing in these, the famous people from New York. Now, the New Year's show will be a little bit different. And this is actually a fundraiser for Arts Express Theater here in Tucson. And so there are performers, singers, and dancers from the theater corps that will be performing. And there'll be casino tables. And then the other thing that I like most about it, well, not most, but one of the things that I really like about it is that it's called Broadway or New Year's on Broadway. So it's New York time, which means the ball will drop at 10 o'clock our time, which is midnight in New York. So we'll do our whole New Year festivities at 10 and be home probably by 11.
Wow.
And can snuggle with the dogs as the new year, as 2024 comes in. None of this crazy driving home when all of the crazy drunks are leaving their parties.
Yeah, I think New York New Year's celebration is just a very pleasant way to say elderly celebration.
Oh,
You know, for the old folks that can't make it till midnight, don't worry, we'll celebrate the New York one. Oh, New York's too late for you? Fine, we'll do the Australian one. That's at 5 p.m.
Oh, okay, that's not get crazy. But New York is like, the cool place. I think
And honestly, it is smart. Like, I didn't even think about that with the crazy driving and the risk of drunk drivers after midnight.
Well, and then all of the, the Ubers are nuts. I mean, everything's just, we've done it before and, Ubered around and, you have to wait a long time. And I don't know, it's just, anyway, that's what we're doing this year. So
Very exciting, very exciting. And we do have Christmas as well. So Mr. Bing's, I mean, that sounds awesome. The fact that it's very well-rounded with the casinos as well as the play, performance. I mean, that's just
and it's also a dinner. It's also dinner theater.
Yeah,
so you have
yeah.
a full Italian meal,
That's sick.
full bar, and I know. So if you and Christina want to come, we'll hook you up with tickets.
I mean, I might be down for that. That sounds like a good time. Okay. All right. Well, that does sound very fun. And we will be, I think we have another episode next week before New Year's,
Yes,
though.
we do. So next Wednesday also. Yeah.
Okay.
And New Year's, I think, is Sunday or Monday again. Good Lord.
Yeah,
I don't even
something
know.
like that. I don't know.
Oh, I think it's Sunday. Well, New Year's Eve is Sunday night. New Year's Day is Monday.
Well,
Ay.
my weekend was very boring. Just hung out, relaxed. I loved it. It's not boring for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Watched the new Leo movie. Big Leo fan. Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah.
What movie is that?
It's Blood Moon Flowers. 3.5 hours long. It was exhausting, but we did rent the movie, which I didn't know was possible this early on, which was great because then we got to pause it and take breaks, and it was good.
But you did it all in one
sitting. Yeah. Christina was not happy about it, but I refused to actually take a real break. I can't stand that.
Oh my gosh! So we rented Oppenheimer. We hadn't seen it in the theater, but similar. I think it was
long.
3 hours, maybe not quite as long. But we started it one night, and then we were like, okay. And again, you're going to say I'm old, but we were tired, so we're like, okay, we watched the
8:30 hit, and
another night.
we're just gonna make it.
I don't know. I mean, it was a really good movie, but it wasn't like really action packed. I mean, there's like one little bit of it that's, some action, but
I think people imagine it being about Hiroshima, which it just isn't. Like you don't really see, there's not much action in it, like you said, other than kind of the very end, and everything else is building up to it, which I went into it knowing that, and I was looking forward to it. And I also love the main actor, Thomas Shelby from, I can't remember the show, but he's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was so much of the whole political aspect and all of what was going on at the time, which was interesting. Which actually reminds me too, because I just watched the series Fellow Travelers. I don't know if you've seen this one.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I mean that's a crazy situation, and it's these two gay men, but it's back in like 1950s Washington McCarthy era, and where they're trying to persecute anybody who might have any connection to communism and also anybody with any connection to homosexuality. Same thing, losing jobs. Suicide, horrible situation, but it was kind of reminiscent of that whole time frame.
Yeah. Well, we have weekends ahead. Good check-in. I do want to make sure we get into updates on cases. I feel like every week this week we are just jam-packed with topics, and we're trying to fit every little bit in.
Yeah, a lot is happening.
Yeah. What updates you got for us?
Okay, well, the first one is another big award against Monsanto. And so Monsanto is the company that makes Roundup.
Yeah.
But this one, we had talked a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was at the same school in Washington, and there had been a really big verdict. And this had to do with the chemicals in the light fixtures that the chemicals were leaking out over the years and causing all sorts of health conditions. And this one, they got hit with an $857 million verdict.
Wait, so the chemicals in the light fixtures, I thought Monsanto was Roundup, the pesticide.
Well, Monsanto owns Roundup, but they make a lot of products, a lot of chemical products.
Yeah.
And so one of them is Roundup, and they've been obviously slammed time and time again on those. And this one, I think it was a couple of weeks ago we had talked about it, but it was the same Washington school, and this had been going on for years, and people were getting extremely sick. This one involved 5 former students and 2 parent volunteers, and they had a variety of illnesses, neurological issues, cognitive problems, autoimmune, and cancers. So anyway, another big slam for them.
That does sound familiar. And what chemicals are in light fixtures? I mean, I didn't think it was that elaborate of a... Oh, I guess maybe like the long ones that schools typically have, the fluorescents. I can imagine those maybe having some.
Yeah, the product actually is polychlorinated biphenyls.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, well, we did mention that in the other one, but so they are used in commercial and industrial lighting fixtures, and it was a situation where they were aware that it was very dangerous, and they were still, incorporating them into the fixtures and not warning. And this again is a situation where a big portion of it was punitive damages. Yeah. It was $784 million in punitive damages.
How much was total?
$857 million. So there was $73 million in compensatory, and this is for 7 people, and serious, long-term and permanent, and some debilitating health,
$10 million per person,
conditions around that. But then $784 million in punitive damages. So again, that punitive damages are where the jury's really pissed off, and they're like, this is extreme, potentially, not exactly intentional, but something where they certainly could have prevented it. They had enough information, and they just chose not to by prioritizing profits over the safety of people and lives lost. So
and I mean, at this point, it's almost like a Monsanto classic of just chemicals being in their products, them being aware of it, not warning against it. And not doing anything about it, not pulling it back or not doing any recalls, anything like that. With these large punitive damages, are you able to bring this up in future cases? For example, for this one, were they able to bring in some of the Roundup situations, or because it seems like it is just a common trend with Monsanto, and so if there's any lawsuit for any of their products, I would imagine, one of their other products that has a history of having chemical problems would be relevant. So
generally that wouldn't come in. The case would be tried on the facts of the case itself. But the decision to whether or not to let other, prior bad acts and those sorts of things come in is up to the judge. And that's one of those motions that we call motions in limine. So they're pretrial motions where the judge is setting the parameters, what evidence is going to come into the trial and what evidence isn't. And in fact, one of the really important motions is whether or not you're even going to be able to ask for punitive damages. Huge motion. Because depending on which way that goes, it can open the floodgates, right? And so a lot of times, if there's if there's a potential for settlement, depending on how those motions go, the cases can settle right before trial. And when a judge says yes, the punitives are coming in, then that the risk is much more significant. Likewise, certain types of evidence, if that's going to come in, I had a case years ago involving a woman who died in a sauna at a health club.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah, it was a really intense, crazy case. But that case ended up settling actually during the trial, but after the motions in limine, because they decided to allow certain photographs into evidence that were going to be pretty upsetting to the jury, and rightfully so.
Do you want to give a little bit of background on this story so people can kind of have an idea of what these photographs would be? If I was a listener, I would be dying to hear it. I'd be incredibly curious. Okay. I'd be on the edge of my seat.
Well, it was a really, really this is such a frustrating and awful case. But like I said, we got all the way to trial and they did ultimately settle it. But what happened was that it was a gym in town that is out of business now. And this was quite a few years ago. But they had there's a program through Medicare called Silver Sneakers. And it's a program for people on Medicare who are older. They get, free access to gyms, and certain gyms will have programs designed for elderly people, a lot of like water aerobics, low impact types of workouts, things along those lines. And so she was a member of the Silver Sneakers program. And so we know that the gym was well aware that there were elderly people there. Yeah. Saunas can be super dangerous, and they need to be monitored. And people cannot spend, there's regulations on how long people should be in there and how the temperature has to be set. Well, at this gym, the industrial thermometer had broken. And so they had a meat thermometer, the thing you stick in the meat. Yeah. And they just stuck it in the wall in the sauna. Nice. And then they were not monitoring. And so the woman was in the sauna and she had an event and lost consciousness. And she basically was cooked. It was like an oven. And she was in there long enough that she looked like she had been cooked. And so
these punitive damages are massive, and it's clear that Monsanto, with its history, they've been getting hit pretty hard with these punitive damages. And I know that you've mentioned a lot about how the board that oversees the company, right? They need to feel safe, and they want the investors to feel safe and think that they're not going to be getting hit with these numbers consistently. How are they managing? Because that is $700 million, over $700 million for 7 people. They have other products that are also getting massive punitive damages. How do they have the money for this, first of all? And then second, how are they planning on just continuing to pay? That just seems so unsustainable.
Well, yeah. So what they're likely doing is they're saying, oh, well, first of all, they're, of course, already saying we're going to appeal. This is ridiculous. It should not have happened, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So they're saying they're going to appeal. They're reassuring the, the investors and the board that they have set funds set aside to handle these, and that this one will get overturned, and that they will potentially be, resolving other cases, and they do have a fund for that. So that's what they tell the investors. But it's still, when these things happen, you see the stocks take a hit. Investors aren't idiots. And if they listen to our podcast, they know that these companies are big fat liars.
Yeah. It's one thing to have some money set to the side, but $700 million. That is nearly $1 billion again for 7, right?
857 on this one, but yeah.
Over 700, over 800 million. And what $1 billion is 1,000 millions, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm not a math whiz over here, but that's my rough estimate. Nearly close to $1 billion for 7 individuals in this case, and that is just one product out of several that they're having issues with. Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine how that conversation goes. It's like, hey, we have money set aside. Okay, how much money?
Right. This is... Well, the other thing is with these, so these products were actually outlawed. The company stopped making them in 1977. So it's not like a situation where there's going to be ongoing cases and they're still trying to sell these products. The problem is that they didn't make enough effort back when they stopped selling them to ensure that the companies they had sold them to, or the people who utilize the buildings, own the buildings, were having them removed. They didn't make adequate efforts to do that. So this isn't something that's ongoing. For example, like Roundup, they're still selling Roundup. Yeah. And so those cases could keep on going. And I guess, investors are going to invest in what they want to invest in. Chemicals are a big business, and chemicals are high risk. So you're going to expect some issues, But again, it's one of those situations where if they respond in an appropriate way and they warn when they find out about the problems and they recall when they find out about issues, if they do all of the right things, the lawsuits aren't successful.
Yeah.
But when you start seeing punitive damage awards, what you know is they didn't do the right thing. They didn't act reasonably.
I mean, they're supposed to do kind of the very basics to make sure that people aren't having these terrible injuries because of their products that they know can cause these problems. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me, and I mentioned this last time we talked about Monsanto, but that there isn't some type of governmental regulation here. I mean, chemicals, like you said, is high risk, and you recognize that, and you know that there are going to be issues. But when there's a company that has consistently shown that they are untrustworthy, right? Like not only is it their products and their chemicals go bad, but when they do go bad, they don't take the necessary actions to protect their customers and their users. I mean, how does that even continue?
Well, and I mean, in theory, there could be criminal charges, like with some of the opioid cases and that sort of situation, where it's a real hazard to society in general, and they knowingly put these things out on the market. I don't know that Monsanto has risen to that level. That would be one angle of it. That there could be criminal charges pursued if it's really extreme.
Well, that's crazy. Over $800 million on a case with 7 plaintiffs. I'll be interested to see how Monsanto does. I mean, with more updates with Roundup, obviously seeing how those cases go out, but they are getting hit hard with punitive damages across the board.
Well, and this is this one particular school too, because the last time we talked about it, it was the same school, a different group of plaintiffs. So clearly this was a situation where they needed to, they should not have left these products, these chemicals in a school where people were, exposed to it daily for years and years and years.
Yeah, that school is unlucky. They're getting the shit end of the stick there.
For sure, yeah.
What else do you got for us for updates?
Well, CPAP, we talked actually last week about the whole hoopla with questioning the FDA's oversight of medical devices based on the way this whole CPAP thing went down and the fact that there were complaints and complaints and complaints back in 2011. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't until literally 10 years later that finally something was done. And so it really put the spotlight on why was the FDA not taking action sooner, and why were they letting CPAP or the Philips get away with this for as long as they were. And I think you had said too that maybe this is going to shed some more light on it and bring more attention to it. And sure enough, 2 senators, Senator Richard Durbin and Richard Blumenthal, have basically called them out and said, we need to take a look at this. This is not okay. Based on that study, the article that we talked about with ProPublica and the other news agency. But based on that investigation, they said, not cool, we need to do something about it. And so what they've done is they're asking an entity that I was actually not familiar with, it might be embarrassing to say that, the Government Accountability Office, GAO. And I wasn't real clear about what that is, but they asked the GAO and Congress to re-examine the Food and Drug Administration's oversight of medical device recalls. So they want them to look and really dig into how the FDA is handling these things and monitoring these things. And so since I wasn't familiar with the GAO, I did a little research on that, and it's considered the congressional watchdog. So it's an independent, nonpartisan agency that works for Congress. And so Congress can actually go to this independent agency and say there's a problem with some aspect of government, some governmental agency, and then they get involved and do an independent study and report back. So maybe something really is going to change as a result of this whole debacle with the CPAP machines.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I think it sheds a ton of light. It puts the spotlight on the FDA and some inconsistencies and issues that they've obviously been struggling with for over 10 years now. The Governmental Accountability Organization Office. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you don't know much about it, because it doesn't seem like many people are being held accountable in the government.
Yeah.
It's good to see that something like that exists, and that it's being called upon and hopefully will enact some type of action. But it's also concerning to me that it's not called upon more often, because I would imagine there's a lot of situations where accountability is just not being held.
Right. And so, and again, it goes to, why haven't I heard about this? And so what I don't know is how effective it really is, how in depth, these reports are, and what happens when they do find a problem within an agency. And this may be one, again, that gets a lot of attention because of, the myriad of people who are affected. I mean, millions and millions of people. So because it's such a big deal, and now it's gone to this GAO, maybe this will be how a lot of us learn about it and see how effective it is. And if they are able to force changes to be made and improvements in the system.
Yeah, I'm still pretty pessimistic, just because even though they say they're independent, bipartisan organization, nothing really is in my mind. I think there's just way too much money at stake. But I will say that when people shit the sheets this bad, that's when things actually change. Because, I mean, hey, you leave a few pebbles in the sheets, you can kind of roll around, forget about it, you don't see it. But when you just let loose an absolute shitstorm of chaos and diarrhea throughout all of the sheets, then it's like, okay, well, we can't ignore this. We got a problem.
The visual on this is disturbing.
We got to get some diapers. I don't know what's going to happen. Bleach, throw out the sheets.
You got to just throw out the bed at that point.
Throw out the bed, yeah. And I mean,
maybe that's how bad it is.
Yeah, and that's what the FDA is right now. It's the bed. It's the bed with shitty sheets all over it.
Well, I mean, it serves, it has very important functions, but they're not being enforced. They're not adequate at this point. And so maybe this is what makes the changes. But I mean, what we were talking about last week with the fact that their computer system was like ancient, and they were putting little stickies on their computer to monitor.
They had like 10 people.
And yeah, they're totally understaffed and underfinanced, I'm sure. Yeah. And what they were working with, their IT, their equipment was just absolutely not up to snuff. So, hopefully, I mean, I'm really curious to see, because again, I mean, it's kind of strange that I'm like, well, I mean, not that I know every agency that exists, but I hadn't heard of this.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see if they do actually do something about this.
Yeah, and part of me thinks, too, is that this lack of funding, this lack of support for FDA is not a coincidence. Like, I mean, with how often the FDA, like the name of it gets thrown around, not only by companies, but even with the whole COVID vaccine, right? Like government and senators and everyone was saying, well, it's FDA approved. Like the FDA rushed this through, and they're putting so much weight on the name. Yet on the back end and behind the scenes, there's so little funding, there's so little support, they're understaffed. They're giving all this accountability to an organization they know doesn't have the resources to do what they are tasked to do.
Well, and as you say, when people are saying, oh, it's FDA approved, people don't understand that what that means is that the company trying to get it approved did all of the studies and provided all of that information and research to the FDA, and the FDA just stamped it. The FDA itself didn't do anything. And again, because they don't have the resources and the ability to do that. We think we're safe, and we think that this, agency is protecting all of us. And maybe this is just what it takes to blow that out of the water and to bring to everybody's attention, hey, you're not as safe as you think you are. You're not as protected as you think you are. And, this agency needs some serious revamping.
Yeah. So. And I think that's a great point. Hopefully this is the turning point for the organization. The CPAP situation it's insane how widespread it is. I mean, literally every single device is problematic in some way, and they're recalling it, but they still don't have a fix. They don't have enough products to actually replace
quickly enough. Yeah. And so people have been using these things, detrimental health, for 10 years, people who've had them at the beginning of this, and continuing to use them. So big problem. But actually, on that CPAP issue, there's another little update too. We had spoken about the fact that there's the individual cases for the physical injuries, But then there's also a class action for the financial out of pocket on the actual devices and the replacement of the devices. And that settlement was entered into in September, but it is now open for claims. So claims can now be submitted. And you can do that by going to the Philips website, and we can throw up a link to that. And also, if you want to contact us, Danny's really good at directing people on how to do this. So it's not huge amounts of money, but again, it is a reimbursement for your out-of-pocket expenses for these machines. And by taking this, this monetary settlement, it does not affect your ability to still pursue a claim for your injuries. And those are separate. Those are ongoing. We're getting calls on those pretty regularly, signing cases on those. So that's definitely a very active litigation right now.
Yeah, that's a big one. And if anyone listening does use a CPAP machine and you haven't been tuning in previous ones, every CPAP machine is affected by this. And so definitely recommend reaching out to probably firstly a doctor and making sure there aren't any adverse effects from long-term use, and then reaching out to an attorney. It's good to hear that they are reimbursing for that, because I would be triggered. I'd be so upset. Even with the reimbursement, the time and the stress and just the annoyance of having to go through all those steps is just an entirely separate thing. And it doesn't affect the initial case as well.
Right. Yeah, and there's a variety of conditions that can be caused by this foam, and not just the ones that are really obvious as far as like lungs and throat and nasal, but other cancers as well. So definitely you want to see a doctor if you have any of these conditions, but you also might be already being treated for one of these conditions and you have absolutely no idea that it could have been related to the CPAP. So it's a good thing to take a look at that list. It's a very long list that is available on our website, but to take a look and see, because if you're being treated for any type of cancer, a lot of those are included, any kind of respiratory issues, just take a look, because it may be on that list and it may be something that you could pursue.
Yeah, it's so crazy to me too that it's so widespread, because when I was having some sleeping issues, I went to a sleep specialist, and the first thing they did was wanting me to go home and do like an at-home sleep test, and said it was probably sleep apnea, and that I was probably going to get a CPAP machine. Like, that's the most common thing. And it seemed like that was kind of their auto reflex when people come in with sleeping issues. And obviously there's unique cases where that doesn't help, or it's not that situation. But I always imagine CPAP machines being a weight thing, right? Like it being oriented around people's weight. But realistically, there's an array of conditions that could lead to it.
A lot of people, if they are overweight, it's an issue. But they can improve that if they lose weight on Ozempic. Not really. Not the best route to go. But there are, as you said, other conditions and people who are not overweight that still require the CPAP machine. Yes. Yeah. And normally, and so you didn't go through that whole process where you,
I was kind of like triggered, because when I went there, when you're talking to someone, and especially a doctor, you can kind of tell when they're really listening to you, and like when they're consciously there compared to just nodding their head and, going through the motions. I felt that with this guy, and I'm sure maybe I have sleep apnea, but I didn't necessarily like the way that it was handled, where it was immediately, okay, this is probably it, and we can actually sign you up for a CPAP machine that you can rent from us and pay extra fee. Like, it was just this whole cycle. I was like, this feels sticky to me.
Well, it's interesting too, and you should ask Christina. My ex-husband, we won't mention his name on here, but had sleep apnea and required one of those machines. But before he was diagnosed, I knew, because you can notice when somebody stops breathing, especially because he was always tired all the time. He would fall asleep in the middle of depositions, because you don't get enough sleep, and so you're tired all the time. But he did go to the lab. And in fact, I remember it was kind of funny, because he was like, okay, I'll see you in the morning. He was because you're supposed to sleep there overnight, and they monitor you. And I was like, woohoo, night on my own, and then it's like 2 hours later, he walks in the door. I'm like, what the heck? And he goes, "Oh, I'm an overachiever." He's like, "They diagnosed me in the first hour, and they said, okay, we don't even need to finish the thing. You have sleep apnea. You need the machine. Go home." And I was like, "Damn."
He wasn't even fully out before he stopped breathing for a little bit.
Yeah. So he had it bad, and he had the whole big old machine. And I mean, it's kind of I think it would be hard for me to sleep with it. It's hard for me to sleep next to it. I can tell you that too. But
I would imagine.
a little bit noisy and.
Yeah, I like to sleep on my side as well, and I think.
Yeah, I don't think you can do that very well with it. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, the CPAPs will continue to update because that is a massive case, and hopefully that is kind of the turning point, like I said, for the FDA, to where people will start to really realize the issues and the problems associated with it, and it's not this, mystical organization that is able to protect the public at all times from all of these products, and the fact of the matter is that they actually don't have the resources to do it. And oftentimes, or pretty much all the time, the documents and the testing that they're receiving is directly from the medical company itself, which I think is just insane.
Yeah, it's a crazy system, but
well,
that's what we do.
Updates.
Okay, so another update, and of course we talked about Tesla last time. A study just came out indicating that Tesla has the highest accident rate of any auto brand.
Interesting.
Yeah. So drivers of Teslas are the most accident prone, and they analyzed 30 car brands. The rate was 23.54 accidents per 1,000 drivers.
23.14?
54.
Wow.
23 and a half per 1,000 drivers. The only others that were more than 20 per 1,000 were Ram and Subaru, which when I saw Subaru, I'm like, what? Because Subaru, don't you think of that as being like, I don't know, kind of granola and, croc-wearing people who don't really seem like they do a lot of crazy driving? I don't know,
but maybe they're also the ones that aren't really super, paying attention and then kind of just going with the flow. The Tesla, I think, is really interesting because I feel like one of the biggest arguments behind the autopilot and kind of the whole idea of a smart car is to prevent car crashes and prevent injuries along those lines. So it seems insane to me and very counterintuitive that they're actually the highest.
Well, and part of that, I think, does go to this whole autopilot software. And as we talked about last time, almost all of them have been recalled based on this auto steer. But, and the whole intention of the auto steer, they say that, well, people are still supposed to be attentive and ready to take control and, not sleeping or reading or whatever else. You see these crazy things on TikTok, what people are doing. But it's kind of promoted. It's questionable as to whether it's promoted that you're really still supposed to be 100% attentive, but people aren't. And so that is problematic. And then we also have this issue that, they're saying that really this whole autopilot should not be used on any kind of roads where there's cross traffic, because the issues, these big accidents that we've talked about with these deaths and, trucks turn in front and they go under and basically decapitate and kill the driver. Really that autopilot should only be like on a freeway where there's not any kind of cross traffic. You're just going straight forward, but there's nothing to disable it or to, limit where people can use it. And again, it's recalled because of this issue. And so that may well have a lot to do with the accident rates.
Yeah. I assumed most of these car crashes were probably, or accidents in general, were having to do with the auto steering. And on the similar topic is earlier on this weekend, actually, I was driving and I was in the parking lot and I saw a Waymo drive into the parking lot, and those are insane to me. Those are absolutely insane because some people think it's crazy. I mean, I do think it's crazy, right? People falling asleep at the wheel while there's autopilot. But these Waymo cars, there's literally no one in the car. No one at all, not even passengers, not people in the back, no driver. It is a fully just automated vehicle. And so it's crazy to me that technology exists and that those are out on the streets and happening. And then we're still seeing so many problems with Tesla. I mean, I would imagine there being issues with both, but it's almost seeming like it's more of...
Yeah, so it must be, it's a different technology.
Yeah.
What do the Waymos do?
They're like Ubers. They're like Ubers, and they just do pickups and drop-offs. And I'm pretty sure you can download the Waymo app. Not sponsored, by the way.
So people they are passengers in them?
Yeah, you hop in the back seat.
Okay.
And it takes you to your destination. And you've probably seen it driving around Tucson as well. They have the big spinning things on the top, on the back, on the sides. But it is actually shocking when you're just sitting there and you see a car pull in past you or next to you with no one in it. Like I actually don't.
I'm not ready for that.
Yeah, that's kind of like scary to me. You know, the whole idea of AI taking over, which I think is a very real concern, but not something we have to worry about anytime soon, and I won't get into. But the fact that that's possible is concerning.
But so how is it that they don't have any issue, with vehicles turning in front of them? I mean, I haven't heard a lot of situations where there were accidents or lawsuits. Actually, I'll research that for next week and just see what I can find out. But I mean, I certainly haven't seen anything coming through on, the news things that I follow.
Yeah, I have no idea either. I mean, I've seen some clips of like where, and I think I mentioned this on one of the previous episodes, where Waymo is getting pulled over and it doesn't recognize that. And there's people in the back seat that are, the cops trying to just get in front of the car, stop it and get it to pull to the side. And the car doesn't know that. It's trying to like go around the guy and reverse and go back around. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy that that's legal. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, Tesla seems to constantly be in the news about something. Makes sense that it has to do with the autopilot, already a recall. Mm-hmm. Hopefully this study probably opens people's eyes up a little bit about this blind trust that I think a lot of people have for the autopilot.
Yeah. Okay, so the next update is back to talcum powder, and we've talked a lot about the talcum powder cases, and a lot of that we see in the situations where women end up with ovarian cancer as a result of using the talcum powder, and then also men who use it on their chests can develop mesothelioma. There was a recent case, and it was the first one that I'd heard of involving the usage on a baby, and I think you might have even asked about this because the whole main use of Johnson's baby powder has always been, when you're changing diapers,
I use it on my diapers all the time.
After you shit the bed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's now I don't shit the bed. It's in the diaper.
Excellent.
Full circle.
Great plan. Yeah. So, and this is a situation where a 24-year-old man had developed pericardial and pleural mesothelioma without other risk factors. And so it was determined that they knew that when he was a baby, his mother had used it every day during diapering and then after baths. And so then at 24, he develops this horrible mesothelioma, and he was awarded, a jury awarded him $18.8 million. So they did find
insane.
Yeah, so they did find that was the, in their opinion, that was the cause of the mesothelioma.
And so he wasn't even using it once he grew out of that baby diaper stage. Right. It was all like that entire thing was accounted towards his mother using it when he was a toddler.
Exactly. And, and this goes to the issue that we've talked about a lot, that is that this condition, it's not something that happens, in 6 months or even a year. I mean, it develops, oftentimes over decades. I mean, you see it like 20 years later.
Crazy.
Right. And, so that's pretty scary too. But again, a 24-year-old having mesothelioma, unless he was, even
you can't even imagine a situation where it makes sense for someone that age.
Well, right, because otherwise, I mean, even if you were working in one of these environments where you're exposed to it, you can't start working till you're 16?
Yeah.
And then it's going to take 10 years to, minimum to probably develop. Yeah. So this was the first one that I had heard of where a jury had actually reached a verdict for someone who had, I shouldn't say he used it, who was exposed to it as a baby. It makes sense. It's terrifying because, I mean, people just do have always done that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how the mother feels as well,
Yeah.
because I mean, obviously it's not her fault, but I would imagine.
No, I mean, she
probably
thought she thought it was safe. I mean, it certainly has been promoted and
Yeah.
advertised as being safe for decades and decades and decades.
What's even scarier about that is that this is all coming out very recently, right? That this is a problem that is causing these health issues, but it's been being used for decades and decades. So there could have been a lot of young mesothelioma cases, or not even just young, just mesothelioma cases in general, no matter what age they develop it at, that is attributed to usage when they're a baby.
Or they just have no idea. Or it could have been as a result, but they didn't know.
Yeah.
And you think about this, Johnson & Johnson knew back in the 70s about this problem, and had they pulled it off of the market in the 70s instead of 2024, when is going to happen?
Yeah.
How many millions of people have been exposed, and even they aren't diagnosed yet, but how many people are getting diagnosed daily? And then they may have other exposures too, and that's what's getting blamed for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a really interesting case and situation. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think you also can't even imagine what it's like for the victim. I mean, it's one thing where you're using a product and you weren't warned of the risks. It's another thing where you didn't even knowingly use it.
You're an innocent little baby.
Just a little baby, and you grow up, and then when you're 24, right? You're pretty much in your prime of your years, and you get hit with this life-changing disease, and that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and he's 24 now. This goes to trial. I mean, he's probably was diagnosed with it 4 or 5 years ago by the time you're going to get to trial, right? And everything. So, yeah, I mean, that was just because I've always kind of wondered, well, what about the babies? And was it just a short enough time period? But no.
I wonder if they're more susceptible as well, because I know babies, right? They're very soft. They're soft creatures, and
their lungs are just like barely developed, right? I mean,
higher risk, I would imagine. This case definitely seems like a sleeping giant, because it has been known for so long, 1970s, I think you said, and it's been kind of like a staple for not only baby care, but also men and women hygiene and kind of day to day, and the disease and illnesses, the problems that it causes are ones that take decades to develop at times. So really, this seems like one of those situations where we'll be seeing it for a while. So kind of similar to Roundup as well, where some of these cases come out of the woodworks out of nowhere.
Well, definitely, and it was on hold for a couple of years there because of the whole Texas two-step LTL bankruptcy bullshit. But they're back, and they're going to trial, and they're going to have to face it and deal with them. But and the thing that makes me crazy too is that, I mean, is there any household in this entire country that hasn't ever had a bottle of Johnson's baby powder in it? I mean, it is permeated every single household probably.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not used on a daily basis, but for a lot of people it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it's like with babies, but I mean, I remember seeing the commercials for it as well. I mean, it is everywhere, Johnson & Johnson.
Well, and come to think of it, all the times I poofed it on your butt, and I probably inhaled it. Now you're 25. No. I mean, I better get checked out.
I could be sleeping case right now.
It's not sleep apnea, it's mesothelioma.
Mesothelioma, that's what it is. Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those cases that just keep coming up. And I would compare Johnson & Johnson to Monsanto, where they just have a variety of different products, a variety of different issues, a variety of different situations where they know that there's problems associated with their products and it is causing damage to the public, and they knowingly don't do anything about it, or they do very, very little about it compared to, what they could have.
Exactly. And then that's when they get slammed with punitive damages.
Yeah, thank God. We are kind of coming to a close here on the show, but I do want to make sure we go over everything.
All right. Well, so on the mesothelioma front, there's another case that I wanted to talk about briefly, and we might have addressed this issue, but it's not your standard case, and that's the secondary exposure. And so there was a recent case again where the daughter of someone who had worked in a workplace where he was exposed to asbestos regularly, she developed mesothelioma, and that is a result of the asbestos fibers on, his clothing. He would come home from work, hug his daughter, the clothes would be laundered. Exactly. And so, the argument was, well, that's not a foreseeable plaintiff. We can't have to worry about protecting, the kids of our workers type of thing. And what the court held is that it was reasonably foreseeable that by exposing the employee, you are also going to be exposing the family. And so since it was such a dangerous product, and this woman did develop mesothelioma and ultimately passed away, they said, yes, it was like a bystander was the way but we're not responsible for bystanders. Well, this bystander you are. So, and there have been other cases as well, involving spouses and children, of workers who were exposed to asbestos. And this was a case in Kentucky. So it is a state by, state potentially, depending on why the case is being brought. But yeah, those cases have been successful.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned that there's more cases similar to this, and those also were successful in the same way this one was?
Well, and I don't know about all of them, but I've, heard of a number of them, and generally they have, generally to my knowledge, they have been.
That makes sense. I mean, I understand their argument, and as a defense attorney, I would imagine that's kind of like your first go-to. Can't really blame them for that. But at the same time, it's like saying, yeah, we know that we are risking killing people, but we're not responsible for risking this person's life, only this person's life. When really that's not the problem at hand. It's not whose life you're risking. It's the fact that that product was out there, it was causing damages, and you were aware of it at the time.
Right. And so in the standard, well, the issue is, to whom do you owe a duty?
Yeah.
And so...
Isn't it just the entire, American society?
Well, you owe a duty to anybody who would be, where it's reasonably foreseeable that they would be affected. And so if it's reasonably foreseeable that someone would be affected by your product, then you owe them a duty. And it's reasonably foreseeable, according to the judge, that the family members would be exposed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrifying. I mean, that's like the hidden killer there. It almost reminds me of when I was in middle school and they're like, don't smoke cigarettes. And they tell stories about how one spouse would smoke every day and the other spouse didn't have a cigarette a single day in her life. And then all of a sudden she ends up getting cancer from the secondhand smoke of the husband. Something along those lines. It's just, that's terrifying. And I think what really makes it scary too is that maybe it is a reasonable assumption when you have these damages if you're a worker, but if you're a spouse or a family member or a child, your first thought wouldn't necessarily be, oh, this came home with this person once, they got off the shift.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, and with the smoking example, and that's probably, it's a lot of the reason why the laws have changed about smoking in public places.
Yeah.
Because back, I can remember the days where you could smoke in airplanes.
Insane.
And there was like a smoking section and a non-smoking section. So, row 22 back is smoking, but if you're in row 21, and really, it's an enclosed plane, and depending on how long the flight is, it's all the way up into row 1, right? I mean, everybody's inhaling it. And so everybody's getting exposed to the carcinogens.
Yeah, I'm glad that they made that decision, and I think it's good that they are showing protections for the family members connected and associated. I can't imagine the problems that would take place if they did, kind of take the side of the company there. Yeah. So is that's all cases that kind of go towards the same thing, or would that be a separate kind of like mass tort, a separate claim?
Well, so these are the asbestos cases and the mesothelioma, and we had talked about this, that there are certain companies that have funds set up so that you can actually make a claim to the fund, and then there are other companies where you actually have to file the lawsuit, and so they're generally individual lawsuits. Person by person, and they're pretty significant because, of course, mesothelioma is a really horrendous and oftentimes, always eventually fatal.
Yeah, and it's also one of those conditions that we've talked about where it's pretty clear-cut case.
It's really specific, yeah.
Not very common. So if you got it, then it's probably connected to something.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to go into questions or interesting cases in the news? I always do love the interesting cases.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, one of the interesting cases is that this just came out. Southwest Airlines reached a $140 million settlement over this whole big crazy holiday flight canceling meltdown last year. I don't know if you remember last time around Christmas, they had canceled, I think, 17,000 flights.
Yeah, wasn't it the pilots were on strike or something?
No, this was a weather situation. And it started out, there was a big winter storm and Denver and Chicago were affected. And so, of course, when that happens, you're going to see some flight cancellations. But it really snowballed because they had their crew rescheduling system couldn't keep up with it. And there were just a number of problems, but they ended up with all of these people who, I mean, I don't know if you remember, like on TV, I mean, there were people like camped out. And,
yeah, I do remember that.
At the airports, and they couldn't get anywhere. And this is like the largest fine that's ever been imposed on an airline for violating consumer protection laws. So it was a big problem, and a variety of issues that they screwed up on. They didn't really do anything to help people who were stranded in airports and hotels. There's a requirement when they make a cancel or delay a flight that they have to notify the public within 30 minutes of a change. That didn't happen. People never got emails or texts about it. Nobody could get through to customer service. They were completely understaffed, and they just fell apart. And I mean, again, it's wintertime. There are going to be certain airports where, you're going to have some weather issues. And they just really, as you would say, shit the sheets or shit the bed, or I don't know what they shit. They shit a lot of stuff. It was pretty bad. And then on top of that, they didn't get refunds processed very quickly. So part of this agreement is that they have changed up their system, and they've added trucks and other de-icing equipment, increasing staff during extreme cold temperatures at certain airports. And so a lot of the settlement is going towards compensating future passengers, because even before this settlement, they had to refund and compensate people for hotels and things along those lines. So they had already paid out, they said, about $600 million in refunds and reimbursements. And so this is an additional $35 million fine, and the whole settlement's $140 million.
I mean, sounds like big numbers, but for an airline, I mean, that's kind of pennies compared to what they got in the Treasury. It sounds like it's almost just a straight infrastructure issue because, like you said, you do expect there being some issues, some delays. And side note, I think the way that our airline system works is insane. Like, I actually can't even imagine.
It's hard to comprehend, right?
It really is. I mean, the amount of moving parts, and you're also considering, the staff and where they're located and everything. It is very impressive. And I can imagine how things get messy on the back end. But this also seems like a situation where they knew that there was potential issues. They knew that this was kind of a faulty system that was standing up on very, wobbly legs. And once one, big, maybe not big, but one medium-sized situation happened, it was just a domino effect and everything around it collapsed.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nightmare. I was so glad I wasn't traveling, and I'm still glad I don't usually travel over the holidays.
I can't even imagine the issues with that because I know, like you said, they did the refunds. It was like roughly 600 million reimbursements and refunds. I would want like more than that. I would want free flight vouchers. I mean, you were ruining thousands of Americans' holidays and schedules, and I mean, just the situations of having to stay in an airport for that long period of time, and also without the notifications. I think the notifications part is a really big point.
Well, and they couldn't get through to customer service to try to, they didn't have enough people handling the calls and just the rescheduling thing. I mean, it was a big nightmare. So part of the settlement is that going forward through April of 2027, you're going to get a voucher for a minimum of $75 if you reach your destination at least 3 hours late. And that's because of a delay or flight cancellation caused by the airline. If it's out of their hands, of course.
And is that specific airline? The one
Southwest. Yeah, it's part of their deal. Yeah,
right. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, 3 hours. That's not like rare, I would say.
No, I don't even complain about 3 3 hours. I mean, I'm not happy about it, but I mean, that's like within, within reason, but they're going to be keeping him on a tight leash now, it sounds like.
Well, that's good. That's good. It seems like, in which agency was this that's going to be overseeing this, I guess? Would it be an agency? I mean, I guess it's kind of the government, just more maybe the trust. Because I was going to say, this is more of a slap on not slap on the wrist, but this is more ramifications than you'd see from the FDA or anything like that.
So it's actually the U.S. Department of Transportation.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, they got their shit together.
Yeah.
I got to send some people over to the FDA. They could use some help.
Well, and this 3-hour thing too, I was just thinking when we were saying that it feels to me like there's this little bit of a scam going on, because I always get, it tells you what time you're going to arrive at your destination. It'll say, 5:45. And then I swear they tack on like an extra hour there because, they're like, oh, we're going to have an early arrival of 15 minutes. And then of course they're probably really actually 45 minutes later than they should have gotten there. But, and again, I guess that's still within reason if I'm planning to be someplace at that time.
Yeah, I think as long as they give you a heads up on it, because I think it's fair for them to be ready for issues. I mean, like we said, the amount of moving pieces there are with this entire industry, it's really impressive that things can keep on moving, especially with different airlines. And it's chaos, I can't imagine. So as long as they're giving a heads up about it, same thing with products, right? As long as they're giving a heads up about the risks, then they're okay.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully over this holiday, everybody got where they wanted to go safely and with a minimum of delay, not more than 3 hours.
Yeah, and if you did have more of a 3-hour delay from Southwest, then you're entitled for a nice little voucher. At least 75.
Not very big, not very big. Yeah. So on questions and comments, it's actually, Danny and I were talking about this earlier, and it's not exactly a question or comment, but I still thought it was interesting feedback from a potential client who had a case, could have pursued the case, and asked Danny, well, how long is it going to take? And she said, well, I can't tell you that. Certainly you could talk to the attorney, but the attorney's not going to be able to tell you exactly how long it's going to take. She gave her a little bit of information about kind of what's involved in that. And she said, okay, well, forget it. I don't want to wait. Well, it is just like
crazy.
Well, it's just kind of strange because I'm like, okay, so what do you mean wait? I mean, so if you don't have to do a lot, basically. I mean, you give us the information, we get the medical records. It's not like you're.
Once you give the information, you
kind of sit back. I mean, in theory, you could end up having to litigate the case, but most of the time, it's going to be a settlement. And so, okay, so what if it was a year? I mean, you still sat on your butt for the year, but you don't get anything at the end.
Yeah.
So why not just? I mean, it made no sense. We were kind of like chuckling about it, but she was like, "Oh no, if it's going to take a long time, I don't want to wait."
Yeah, like she's going to have to be checking in on it every week when realistically that's just not the case.
Forget about it. Yeah. I mean, it was just so strange.
That is odd. I mean, I can understand people's frustrations with the time because I think unless you really understand what goes on in the back end and how many moving pieces there are and how large these cases are and how many victims are. It's easy to get frustrated because it does take a while. Right. Once you start understanding the back end, I think it's more understandable. But I think it's all about the ease for the client. And realistically, I mean, we make it very easy. And I think a majority of law firms, personal injury law firms, make it very easy for the clients.
Well, and then is it going to be a situation like with the 3M earplugs where, 2 years from now, she hears that there's this big settlement and everybody who did sign up is actually getting paid. She's going like, wait, I want to do it. Like, well, why didn't you sign up 2 years ago? And, here you are 2 years later, you would have been doing the same things for the last 2 years, but these people are getting money and you're not.
Literally, it doesn't affect their day-to-day at all.
Well, exactly. I just cannot figure. That was stumper. We were like, wow.
Yeah, maybe that's a good question for the audience. How do you get into that position or come to that conclusion, that perspective of not wanting to wait? And also maybe ways that we can communicate it better, because I think it is something people get frustrated about. I know when I was working as a legal assistant and car crash cases, they're a little bit faster, depending on the case. Some can be pretty fast because insurance companies are obviously just trying to get them out of the way. But people would get really frustrated with it. And they'd just be like, well, I just want my car. I just want my money. And it's not that simple. There's a bureaucracy.
Right.
There's a lot of hoops you got to jump through.
Well, and it's just like, in a situation like this, I mean, you didn't have any money to, for this case to start with. Don't plan for it, pre-spend it, assume it's going to be here at at a certain time. But, a year and a half later,
it could be big too. I mean, some of these cases are massive.
Yes, exactly. And so, anyway, that was strange. And then we had a couple of like weird potential clients this week. Like really, poor Danny, because the other one, and this one was another kind of stumper. So it was a client who was incarcerated, who has it was a hernia mesh case. And those cases, it's really difficult when they're incarcerated because the medical care is difficult to get. There's a lot of delay on it. Issues if you are going to, they can't, as far as getting additional treatment, it's very limited.
Yeah.
Then there's of course issues if they're testifying, if it's a felony, which it probably is if they're incarcerated. That can go to their credibility.
So that's a lot more hoops that
it's just so they're not like. I mean, we absolutely take cases and we represent a number of people who are incarcerated, and we will certainly do that, but they are more difficult for the attorney. So anyway, this case, send the fee agreement back. We get it back. Completely. I'm not paying this. I'm not going to do that. Rewrote this, rewrote that, all kinds of stuff. And like legalese, like he was hanging out at the law library at the prison, and I'm not signing this fee agreement like this. This is the way it's going to be. And we're like,
interesting. I don't know if he's in the position to really be.
Well, I mean, but so the question of that is, I think, goes to, how negotiable are the terms of a fee agreement? And absolutely, there are certain things that, that can be discussed. But in most of these cases, and I think what people, and his thing was, well, I don't want to pay that much of the fee. I mean, it's going to be a more difficult case because you're incarcerated to start with. And then secondly, the reason, the attorney is the one who's going to do all of the work here, take all of the risk, and put all of the money in.
They're not paying anything.
Right. I mean, basically, they don't do anything. And so, again, and even less probably if you're incarcerated, you're just not going to be available. I mean, in theory, we could go there for the deposition if need be. But but I mean, it's not particularly negotiable. I mean, there are some things, yes, on certain types of cases, but generally speaking, the reason most attorneys are not going to want to take the case for a significantly reduced fee. Again, we're taking all of the risk.
Yeah.
You have to be compensated for the work you're doing. And so, yes, it's fine to discuss that. But I mean, to completely rewrite a fee agreement,
bold.
It's bold, and it's probably not going to fly. It's probably not going to fly.
Well, that is a good question, is that because to my understanding, the industry standard is essentially 33.3% of...
For car accidents.
For car accidents, okay.
Yes, for product
40%.
For products liability and medical malpractice, that is 40%.
On top of costs associated with pursuing it?
Well, so the costs are basically the client's responsibility, but almost all firms, and ours included, would advance those costs and then get compensated back. So basically we're taking the risk because if the case is lost, we're not going to go collect the costs from the client. A client could pay the costs up front if they want to, but of course they're not going to want to. They would have for the actual work, that's a percentage of the recovery, and then we would get reimbursed for the costs if we had paid them.
And do any law firms do less than 40% for these type of cases? I mean, I'm assuming it's up to the law firm itself if they want to lower that percentage. Is there ever like a bidding war on the really good cases?
Not really. I think what happens is, you sign that fee agreement initially, but there have been many, many, many times over the years where when the case is getting resolved, I do reduce the fee. And that's based upon, depending on how much we're getting, how much the client's going to end up with. Absolutely. And every attorney is ethically obligated to look at the fee at the end of the case and determine whether it's reasonable under the circumstances. And so, if you've litigated a case for 5 years, you probably are entitled to your 40%. If we take the case and it's a slam dunk and they pay you, like this has become like car accidents where they pay the policy limits the next day. Yeah. It is unethical to take a full fee on that.
Yeah.
Okay, you just didn't do enough work to earn that. But you're going to start off with that fee that's going to protect you in the event that it is a case you're litigating for 5 years. And then if things change, you'll have to modify it at that time.
Yeah, and I mean, a really important point, and we've talked about this a lot, is that there are no out of pocket costs for filing a case for the client, though. There's a lot of upfront costs for the attorney.
I mean, we pay all of those.
Exactly. And it's not like he's having to, take out a loan or anything along those lines. And it's especially interesting because of the situation he's in. Those require even more work and even more effort on your side of things. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, and it's a good topic to bring up, because I think a lot of people, I didn't know that you could actually negotiate it. And I guess technically you can, but most law firms kind of have their
yeah. Well, in certain things, like car accidents, I mean, there's always like the people who advertise like a 25% fee. So there are some that are, lower fees, on the car accidents. But you don't see that as much in the products liability. Again, these are very complicated cases, time intensive, money intensive. Yeah. Potentially can be a high risk for the attorney. So, it's pretty much the standard.
Well, I also think that a lot of these types of cases are a lot more like team atmosphere, and everyone's on the same page when it comes to attorneys. Obviously, you got your renegades on the side, compared to car crashes, which is a little bit more competitive. That they're going for more quantity over quality. But these mass tort, mass litigation cases, all the lawyers are kind of on the same page, and so I think that mutual agreement probably extends, maybe unknowingly, to the percentages that you're taking out on it, right? Like everyone.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I always think it's interesting when people do like a lot of like lawyer shopping, and I think it's perfectly fine to interview different lawyers and find the lawyer that you're comfortable with. But you don't want to just be like, well, what will you take and what will you take, and go for the lowest bidder, because that's not necessarily going to get you the best attorney.
Yeah. Well, we have come to the end of the show. Fantastic overall. I think we covered some really good topics, and it was very holiday. It was very cheerful.
Yes, your hat looks fabulous.
Thank you. And I want to wish a Merry Christmas to all of our listeners. Thank you for tuning in and hanging out with us. And also thank you for the 10,000 subscribers. We mentioned it last show, but I don't think we can mention it enough of how appreciative we are that you guys hang out with us and just allow us to do what we do and listen to us ramble on about whatever we may be rambling on about. And we really appreciate all the support that we've gotten. If anyone does have any questions or concerns, feel free to throw it in the comment section. You can DM us on Facebook, on Instagram. We always are checking those, as well as the email podcast@showardlaw.com. We'd love to hear feedback. And if there's topics that you want us to cover, because there's a lot of interesting stuff out there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about personal injury or mass torts. I mean, she's a whiz at just about everything when it comes to
I don't know about that, but we know people to ask, and we can research it for you if I don't know about it.
But like I said, we appreciate everyone tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, throw a comment, whatever it is, throw a like. We appreciate it. And
get your friends to do it too.
Yeah. Hope you guys have an amazing holiday, and be safe this upcoming New Year's. Prioritizing profits.
Dangerous drug and product cases.